Let's go to your chapter on the regulatory state. I'd like you to explain what the capture theory of regulation is and whether you think it really has merit, whether it really describes reality.
Oh, I absolutely think it describes reality. The capture theory of regulation, basically, it says that over time, regulatory agencies increasingly favor the interests of those they regulate rather than the general public. And, I mean, you see this time and time again, where regulatory agencies, nominally they're established in order to support the public interest, but the general public has very little knowledge about what these regulatory agencies do. The general public is rationally ignorant. I mean, even if they knew what the regulatory agencies were doing, they wouldn't have any power to change what they're doing. And meanwhile, the firms that are regulated, those are the firms that have a big stake in the regulatory activities. Those are the firms, I mean, if they can get a couple of dollars each from everybody in the general public, it's millions and millions of dollars for the regulated firms. And so increasingly, they have the connections, the people in the regulated firms, they have the political connections. They're able to go and lobby the regulatory agencies. They're able to go and lobby the legislature in order to get things to turn out increasingly in their favor. So the regulatory agencies, government regulation, basically essentially favors the firms that are regulated. This is an idea that plays very large in Murray Rothbard's book on the progressive era, but it's something that economic historians have seen for a long time.
What's driving it? Why does this? I mean, in theory, in other words, you could imagine a situation in which you had a very adversarial regulatory body. Why does it trend in this direction?
Well, it trends in that direction because the firms that are regulated, they are the groups who know about the regulation. They are the groups who are politically connected. They're the groups that lobby the legislature. And meanwhile, the general public, they have very little interest at all in what's going on in the regulatory arena. I mean, a really good example of regulatory capture is with electric utility regulation in the United States. And it's a good example, I think, just because most people are familiar with the idea. We have a monopoly electric utility. The government prevents entry, won't let other firms compete with the monopoly utility, and most people have no idea whatsoever about the regulatory process. Meanwhile, the electric utilities, those are the people who show up at the regulatory hearings. Those are the people who control the information that's available to the regulators. So the idea is the firms are regulated to get a fair rate of return. But where do the regulatory agencies get their information about what would be a fair rate of return? Well, all the financial information comes from the regulated firms themselves. So you see the process where essentially it's the firms themselves who control the process. Another interesting recent example, probably a lot of your listeners will be familiar with the problems Boeing has had with their 737 MAX jets after a couple of crashes. And what's come out in the process is that the Federal Aviation Administration supposedly is regulating the airliner manufacturers, the airplane manufacturers, but the people who are actually overseeing the process, the people who are actually doing the regulating, are employees of Boeing. That there's a process that I think the public is becoming more aware of, where individuals can apply to be designated examiners who essentially are doing the job of the FAA. You could apply to be a designated examiner, Tom. I could too. Of course, we have no interest in doing that. Who are the people who get the designated examiner positions? Those are the people who are the employees of the manufacturers. And the same thing is true when you look at the airlines, that airliners have to be inspected every 100 hours of flight. The pilots have to go through recurrent training and testing every 6 months. But who are the people who are inspecting the airliners? Who are the people who are doing the training? Well, they're designated examiners from the FAA. They're employees of the airlines. So, basically the whole process is run by the industry. The general public doesn't tend to see this because they think the FAA is in charge.